I simulated 10 seasons of F1 23 with Toyota back in the sport. We start this 10-year sim with an incredible championship which went right down to the wire between Leclerc and Verstappen. Although Verstappen claimed more wins and achieved more podiums than Leclerc, he still finished 3 points behind him, with Charles being consistent for once. As well as this, Ferrari won the Constructors, which would make it the first time in 15 years. Hamilton also carried Mercedes heavily to third in the Constructors as he got 3 wins and 232 points. Elsewhere in the drivers, Perez massively underperformed as his performances led to Ferrari cruising to first in the Constructors. Alonso scored 80 of Aston's 86 points, McLaren kind of underperformed with Norris and Piastri, and Williams claimed 7th place while nearly beating Alpine. And finally, Toyota scored 0 points on their F1 return and yet still weren't dead last. But as you can see, Drugovich is in the top 10 and he's in white writing. He doesn't drive for Haas, don't worry, but what this shows is that he was a free agent, hence the white, at the start of the season, and he managed to get a seat at mid-season. It's how I show the free agents coming into the sport. But that leads us nicely to the driver moves, and we start at Toyota as Verschoor was dropped for Liam Lawson. At Mercedes, Russell was dropped for Piastri, and that meant Drugovich got in the McLaren seat for the second half of the season. At postseason, Hamilton retired, giving up on his dream of 8 championships, so surely this meant Russell would return back to Mercedes. Instead, it was Leclerc who got his dream title win with Ferrari and quickly dipped before they themselves would dip and not win another championship for 15 years. Onto the rest of the grid now, and Drugovich was dropped by McLaren after only scoring 13 points in the 4th best car, and Stroll replaced him. A worthy replacement, that's for sure. Albon moved to Aston Martin in turn, and Russell and Piastri moved to Williams. In Oscar's place came Theo Pourchaire. Off the back of his F2 title, he just casually went and got himself one of the best seats in F1. And we complete the grid by going to AlphaTauri as Sargent replaced the outgoing Ricciardo, who was off to Ferrari. A crazy first year, it's fair to say. And to top it all off, we had aero and chassis reg changes on the way going into season 2. Looking at the R&D chart, Aston Martin are the 2nd best team, with title winners Ferrari only being the 5th best. Toyota are the best of the rest of F1.5, and it's pretty close all round. On to season 2. And surprise surprise, Max has done it. It wasn't exactly easy for him though, with a wild science coming close, but ultimately not close enough to his points total. 302 points, 7 wins, and a 3rd World Championship for Supermax. Perez was better this year, and with this, Red Bull managed to win the Constructors again. Mercedes edged ahead of Aston Martin as they were slightly more competitive without the added weight of Stroll. One man's trash is another man's trash though, as Stroll might have cost McLaren 3rd place in the Constructors. Norris managed to get 169 points, 5 podiums, and even a first win around Monaco, as he could have done with a good teammate. Just behind Lando was Ricciardo, who couldn't really come close to Sainz but did end up with a race win at Canada. I don't know how I forgot his win though when I was making the graphics, so sorry, my bad. Down the grid, Williams kept up their good form and even beat Alpine, and Haas beat the other backmarkers to 8th place as Toyota were a disappointing 10th place once again. But remember Pourchaire went to Mercedes? Where is he in the standings? Well, he wasn't in the top 10 because he was sacked at mid-season. Ocon was his replacement. Drugovich once again picked up the pieces as he moved to Alpine, and at post-season, Alonso retired, which led to Sainz ditching Ferrari for Aston Martin. This led to some chaos with Gasly going to Ferrari, Bottas moving to McLaren, Russell replacing Valtteri at Alfa Romeo, Sargent going to Mercedes, and Norris moving to AlphaTauri. But I'm not done yet. Albon replaced Yuki at AlphaTauri as he rejoined his first team, Pourchaire joined Aston Martin, and finally Tsunoda moved to Williams. As we finish off season 2, we have more reg changes as powertrain and durability are both affected, and looking to the chart, Aston Martin are the fastest car ahead of Red Bull as Haas are better than Mercedes and Toyota are the worst. And it's another first-time champion as Ferrari's Gasly won out ahead of Leclerc and Bottas. Even at the ripe age of 37, Bottas still schooled Lance and carried McLaren to 2nd in the Constructors. With a good teammate, who knows, they probably would have won the whole thing. But I'll give Lance his flowers one time, because in Monaco, the McLaren boys got a 1-2. Elsewhere, Sainz carried his team to 5th place, and they should have beat Red Bull as Alfa Romeo climbed to 6th in the standings. All because of Russell and his 87 points, but it all counts. And further down, Haas held on to the 8th place as Toyota have slipped below AlphaTauri into the depths of 11th place. There weren't any reg changes to save them this time, and with that, let's move on to the driver moves. After a good year and 3 more wins, Bottas retired at postseason as Pourchaire replaced him at McLaren. This led to Ocon going to Aston Martin, Hülkenberg went to Mercedes, Stroll moved to Haas, and Sainz returned to McLaren. Drugovich finally got the seat at Aston Martin as Piastri also finally got the Alpine gig. Tsunoda also went to Alpine as Perez was dropped down to Williams alongside Sargent. And to complete the grid, Hauger went to Haas instead of Magnussen as he was off to Red Bull. Toyota were quite far off it in the development screen, and as you can see, Haas are the 4th best car. Mercedes and Red Bull are only 5th and 6th best, and Ferrari, McLaren and Aston Martin are neck to neck in 1st. And would you look at that, we have another first time winner of the championship. McLaren had finally found their two drivers as Sainz and Pourchaire destroyed the sport. Sainz destroyed it so much that he won every single race and was only 10 fastest laps off of achieving maximum points. This obviously meant no one else won a race this year, which is no fun, but I guess the rest of the standings were pretty interesting. Well, starting with Mercedes and Red Bull, they were off it, mainly because of the two awful teammates for Leclerc and Verstappen though. Alpine had recovered as they reclaimed 6th place, but Alfa, or should I say Russell, was still 7th place. But the high-flying Haas fell out of the sky as they didn't develop the car at all in Season 4. And another disappointment was Toyota, who also didn't score a point and finished dead last again. Into the driver moves, and there weren't as many as in previous seasons, as we start with Lawson being dropped at Toyota for Fittipaldi. Albon was dropped at AlphaTauri for Jack Doohan, and Hauger joined Mercedes with Hülkenberg heading to Williams. Sargent moved to Haas to complete the grid. And for the third time in 4 years, we have more reg changes as aero and chassis are affected once again. But I can explain why Toyota was so bad once again this year. It was because we were guessing that there might be some reg changes coming, and so with the lack of money thanks to the cost cap, we had to save money, and that meant not developing the car at all. But did the gamble pay off? Let's find out and see how Toyota did in Season 5. Well, firstly, at the start of the year going into Bahrain, the best cars were the Williams, Alpine and Aston Martin, as Toyota had maintained their parts as McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari had all suffered from the drop. With that, let's see the graphic. Felipe Drugovich edged out ahead of Verstappen as the grid had been shaken up. Firstly, an Aston Martin champion is unheard of after the summer patch, but secondly, Mercedes are behind Toyota as they were only in front of the Haas team that scored 2 points. Ferrari were also off it as they finished behind Alpine, Alfa Romeo and Williams. With this shaken up grid, we saw Piastri win an Alpine dominated Saudi Arabia race, and George Russell even won in his Alfa Romeo. But on to driver moves, and with records made and a title won, Sainz retired from F1. In his place came another champion, Felipe Drugovich. Hauger moved to Aston Martin after this, Lawson went to Mercedes, Zhou was dropped at Alfa Romeo for the free agent Albon, and finally Hülkenberg retired, leading to Deruvala going to Williams. Unsurprisingly, there aren't any reg changes, and in the R&D chart we can see the initial drop by the big teams and the gains they would make to get back up there. Toyota aren't as far off anymore, but still need to start actually challenging. And well, what a season it was. Pourchaire won his first title from Drugovich in a Mercedes-esque battle at the front. It's looking much better for Toyota though, as we finally got the big points and were second in the constructors. Enzo even got his and the team's first win in Miami. 5 teams didn't score points because of this though, and it was Alpine who were the best of them in 7th. Verstappen once again carried Red Bull and they nearly beat us, as even Glock contributed more than Magnussen. But you might be asking where Williams has come from with his 7 wins. It's not the actual team if you were curious, but that leads us into the driver moves, and we start with Enzo. Yeah, he was dropped and he moved to Williams. Ironic, as Kalen Williams was the man who replaced him. He won on debut and then would win 6 more times in his 8 races with the team. He was the main reason we finished where we did, and we finally had a real special driver on our hands. Into postseason, and we had a few droppings as Sargent was binned off by Haas for Jack Doohan, Fittipaldi by Williams and Lawson by Mercedes. Their replacements were Iwasa and Vips as Zhou completed the grid at AlphaTauri. It had finally been done and Kalen Williams became Toyota's first world champion. They also won their first Constructors' Trophy, and what a season it was. 8 wins, 5 more than anyone else, and nearly 100 points clear of 2nd place. With Glock doing decent as well, we were still pretty clear of 2nd place McLaren to cap off a very good season. Once again, 5 teams didn't score a single point and the order stayed the same at the back of the grid. McLaren continued to have a better pairing than Red Bull, Mercedes or Ferrari, as they were the only people who could even slightly challenge Toyota. Onto the driver moves, and at the end of the season Gasly called it quits and left F1. Sargent was his replacement at Ferrari. And probably the most unfair decision I've ever made, Kalen Williams was dropped by Toyota for Yuki Tsunoda. The plan was always going to be to get the best Japanese driver on the grid, and I fully expected Kalen Williams to join a top team. That was the plan. To spoil it, he didn't join a team after the season. Instead of a world champion, Alfa Romeo chose Marino Sato to replace Albon, who left to join Alpine. Crazy decisions, but I guess that's why they're the 7th best team. Anyway, Zhou was dropped by AlphaTauri as they brought Liam Lawson back, and Iwasa was dropped for Fittipaldi. Finally, Doohan was dropped and Vips joined Haas as Caldwell joined Mercedes. We would have reg changes for Season 8 as powertrain and durability would be affected, and I probably don't need to talk about the R&D chart anymore. Finally, we have a double winner. It's only taken us 8 seasons, but we got there. Leclerc dominated this season, getting a podium in every race and winning half of them. Mercedes were on top for the first time in the save, and Toyota kept up their good finishes as they were 4th. For once though, the terrible teammates of Leclerc actually did enough to finish 1st. Red Bull kept their trust in Magnussen as Verstappen was still doing really well, but maybe getting Yuki in was the wrong choice. We'll see in the next few years. But once again, to finish off the review, 5 teams didn't score a point and Aston Martin scored a few, but not many. On to the moves, and at mid-season, Caldwell was sacked for doing at Mercedes, and finally Alfa Romeo had some sense and replaced Sato for Kalen Williams. That didn't mean much at post-season though when they sacked him for Novalak. Onto the rest of the grid, Magnussen was finally dropped by Red Bull as Iwasa was given the big seat. Sargent moved to McLaren, with Derulo replacing Logan at Ferrari. Doohan was dropped by Mercedes at post-season, and with Leclerc retiring, there would be 2 free seats. They were taken by Théo Pourchaire and Zhou Guanyu. There weren't any reg changes for Season 9, so let's get into it. Mercedes continued their streak at the top in Season 9 with Pourchaire, like Leclerc before him, claiming his 2nd title at the Silver Arrows. He wasn't that far ahead of old teammate Drogovic, but ultimately his 2 extra wins helped out. His teammate Zhou didn't do that great, but one team that has finally sorted out their drivers is Red Bull. Finally, they had found someone who could actually compete with Max and help the team. And this worked. They got a lot more points and Max nearly got beat by the new guy. Also ignore Sargent in red, he's meant to be orange. But he did an alright job to help McLaren clinch the constructors. Ferrari haven't really recovered and continue to be 5th best, and Tsunoda still hasn't won a race for Toyota. Oh, and to keep up the tradition, Aston got a few points but not many to finish 6th, and 5 teams didn't score a single point. There definitely would be some good racing if 5 teams couldn't score a single point and were just scrapping for 11th place every race. On to the final driver move segment of the video, and we start at mid-season where Albon was dropped at Alpine for Liam Lawson. Derulo got the seat at AlphaTauri, Doohan moved to Ferrari, and finally Novalak got sacked for Vesti. At post-season, Stroll retired from F1 after 17 straight seasons in the sport, and in his place at Haas came Logan Sargent as Caldwell replaced him at McLaren. Norris was dropped at AlphaTauri after they presumably ran out of money to keep signing him on, and Magnussen replaced him. Ocon was dropped with Verschoor going to Aston Martin, Doohan was dropped with Iwasa going to Ferrari, and Cordial completed the grid at Red Bull for the final season. And finally, we have big reg changes as aero, chassis and durability are all affected. Could Yuki win in the final season? Can Toyota come back and win another championship? Good questions to ask, so let's see what happens in Season 10 of the simulation. Well, that was an unexpected but expected end to the sim. Verstappen won another championship, claiming 9 wins and 14 podiums along the way. But our questions have been answered. Can Yuki win? No, he can't, he's useless. He nearly got beat by Glock. And can Toyota win? No, because we just can't. I guess they will forever remain the 4th best team and never move up or down in the standings. So we have found one thing. You can make Toyota world champions if you hire an Australian, but they immediately become mid when you put a Japanese driver in the team. I'll leave you with that. Subscribe if you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching.